same manner, the one who had received the 2 talents gained 2 more. But he who had received the 1 talent went away and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. The one who had received the 5 talents came up and brought 5 more talents, saying, Master, you entrusted 5 talents to me. See, I have gained 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Also the one who had received the 2 talents came up and said, Master, you have entrusted 2 talents to me. See, I have gained 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one also who had received the 1 talent came up and said, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. And I was afraid, and went away and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours. But his master answered and said to him, You wicked, lazy slave, you knew that I reap where I did not sow, and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have put my money in the bank, and on my arrival I would have received my money back with interest. Therefore take away the talent from him, and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But the one who does not have, even what he does have, shall be taken away. Throw out the worthless slave into outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Okay, thank you. So, that it is simultaneously, just like Jesus likes to do, it makes me feel good when I hear that, the first part, and then there's that cautionary tale at the end. And so, I guess first, let's talk about what a talent is. So, what is a talent? Are we talking about juggling or right? In English, right? In English, a talent means something totally different to us. So, oh, is this going to be a quiet auditorium class? Yeah. Okay.
No, it's a measure of money.
Yeah.
You know, it's $60,000 or $70,000.
Yeah.
For a talent.
Yeah. And so the Greek talent is much different than what we think of in our culture today. The NIV, I'm not a big NIV fan, but NIV I think does a good job here. It says bag of gold. Even, we know silver was the most common coin in that time, but bag of gold kind of brings the point home for us better, I think, than the Greek word talent. So we were talking about this before. I've heard everything from one year salary to 5, 10, and 20 even. And so what's the point of all that? What's the point in this part of the parable?
I think it's that he entrusted them with something that was valuable, not just to them, but also even more so to him.
Yeah. And even just 1 talent is a huge sum of money, let alone 2 or 5, right? And so, so it's interesting. How does what we do with money translate to our character? What does that say about our character?
Well, I think to translate it into our character, we have to think about what is valuable to us. And so I also like that thought of a bag of gold, because it's much easier to think of that metaphorically, because I have a tremendous bag of gold that God has given me that is even better. It's priceless. It's a great gift. And so that's how I think of that, and it helps me to think of what am I doing with this gift that God has given me, whether it's a bag of gold or some other much more valuable gift. Am I hiding it away? And so that's why I think it applies. But,
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you finished? Wally and
When I read this, I don't read about money. I read about whatever God has given me. Some of us can be a good example. Some of us can be teachers. Some can be preachers. Some can be elders. Some can be an encouragement to our young people or for children. But whatever God has given us, that's how I read. And I know that for the sake of an example, it works well with the talents. But I read it somewhat differently.
yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, it's something valuable he's given us, right? Oh, and 1, 2, and then 3.
Because money is a medium of exchange, then it's pretty much universally valued because most of the time there's something that you can get with that money, regardless of what your proclivities are. But what's interesting about this is that they were given money that did not belong to them. They were given money in trust. And that says a lot about character. Because a person who has a godlike character, a Christ-like character, recognizes the responsibility of representing the person who gave you the money. Because it's not your money. And in a funny way, all 3 of these servants kind of understood that. Sometimes I think, in terms of what Wallace said, we can sometimes think that things that God has given us belong to us. And whether you're talking about good health or the ability to be taught by people so you get an education, the ability to be trained by people so that you're a good athlete, nothing we have came from us. And there's a sense then in which it's under our care and entrusted to us, but it doesn't belong to us. And so money does test character, but especially money that does not belong to us. And once we realize that everything is God's, then suddenly the way we look at money becomes a test of our appreciation for God.
I was going to say both of the two, but what it boils down to what transcends is character, but it also involves responsibility and it involves self-control, but also gratitude. God has given you for the money was given. Someone trusted you with this. Someone, it doesn't belong to you. It was given to you and put in your charge. And I think sometimes we forget that our talents that God has blessed us with are gifts. They're called gifts in the Word. And we're not as grateful for them as much as we take possession instead of take responsibility. And, oh, I can do this. I'm good at that. As opposed to God has entrusted me with this. What can I do with it best?
When I read the word talent or here when it's read, I can't help but think of people, friends, family, community. And especially when it reaches verse 24, that he who had received the one came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man. Reaping where you have sown, not gathering where you see. And I was afraid, and it gets to the part where it looked I was put in the ground. That person is now dead because of their wicked ways. When God granted them that talent in their life, like when I read the word talent, I can't help but think of friends, family, community. And the one was given one talent and failed miserably at it, and that talent ended up dead in the ground.
I find it important where he says, to each according to his ability, in verse 15, because he didn't just randomly give everybody the same thing. It was very thoughtful, and he knew his servants. And I think that's important. Like, God has entrusted us with whatever the talents represent, because he knows us, and he knows we can handle it, and he knows that we're able to take and multiply them. So to me, that's an important point here.
Yeah. So that's actually exactly where we're going next. It's almost like you're a preacher's wife and you're scooting us along.
Preacher's daughter.
Yeah. So verse 15 through 17, someone got 5, someone got 2, and another got 1. So how did he decide? And what did he expect of those servants?
When I think of it, I think of growth. The master lost none of his money. He got it all back. And then some. And that's the most important part about it, is not being stagnant in our lives. And with whatever value God gives us, it's our responsibility to use it and grow.
Well, he knew his servants, that's why he gave a trusted one 5, and another trusted one 2, and to the other one 1. And he didn't expect that third individual only got 1 to double his money. He said you could at least put it with the bankers and I would have got interest. But he knew their abilities and what to expect of them. And I think, if he'd have put it with the bankers, got a little bit of interest on it, he would not have been condemned. But he chose not to do anything.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the pattern is the first one, 100% return, second one, 100% return, and, but the third one just hid it away, right? So are the servants, sorry, okay, I'll go over here first.
Well, I was looking at this, and the master had an expectation for these men that he gave this money to. I kind of like the thing that the expectation is a responsibility on me. That's the way I kind of look at it. I don't really look at it as money, as some have said. 2 is that it's responsibility to me to do something to glorify the master, and in our case, the Lord. And so he has an expectation, and I need to fulfill that. Otherwise, he's not going to be happy with me, and I'm not going to be serving him in the way that he wants me to.
Yeah, it's not money. That's not the point. The point is he gave us something of value, and the best way for him to help us understand it is for him to set up the world the way he did, with money being something that's important and useful, and then drawing that comparison.
I think it's interesting to see too, that it's so common with human nature. The unproductive servant started off more than he should be and thought less of his master. And I think that when we don't use our talents and we are not responsible and we behave the way we do, we fail God, is we tend to not appreciate or look at God. I can't do this because you didn't do this. It's because of whatever. It's not me. It's just something else, somebody else.
I saw him over here earlier and I missed. You got anything still, or no?
Well, I think the parable of the talents presents an interesting juxtaposition to a lot of Jesus' other rhetoric, in that he talks a lot about the rich man, and we see throughout the New Testament too, really, the rich man is always considered the one on the outs, right? But in this case, the servant who has the most and those with the most here are the blessed ones. So when we look at this, it's really about the mentality, right? It's what the servant does with what they're given. And it's also, not for us to compare against the people in the pew next to us, right? It'd be easy to look around your life I've known people in my life of all walks, and I constantly find that the 5-figure man is jealous of the 6-figure man is jealous of the 7-figure man and the 8-figure man. And the only 9-figure man I know wishes that his country club was the one that John McCain goes to, and he wants to be the 10-figure man. So, it's really about doing with what God has given you. And in the AG family, we have a behind the scenes, when we're amongst ourselves saying that is poor people have poor ways. And what that means is really that people with poor ways, whether you give them $10, $100, $1,000, $1 million, they're going to use it and just blow it in the same fashion that they would a small sum or a large sum. So it's really about not being wasteful as a servant of God and to use the things that you've been given. Whether it is financial, like this example, or I think it was Wally that said, whether it's your inner gifts, using those things to bring wealth to the world and to bring God to the world in a way that lights it up, like we get in the Sermon on the Mount. So, anyway, sorry to hijack the class.
No, I think it's interesting, right? Like this, we can learn a lot about the master from this interaction, right? I mean, like Carolyn said, he knows servants so well. He knows what they can handle. He knows what they should be able to do. And this is a very important point, right? He doesn't compare them against one another, right? It's its own little microcosm, right? Five talent person judged separately from the 2-talent person and the 1-talent person. And so, living up to your potential is really what he's after. And the wonderful thing, I think, the most wonderful thing is it's all about the growth of the servant, right? His judgment is sharing your master's joy, and then he gives the profits to the servants. He doesn't, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to connect to the context. Remember that he's not telling this to the multitudes at all. He's not even telling this to a broad variety of disciples. He's telling this to the apostles. Mark says he's telling it to Peter, Andrew, James, and John. So this is a very select audience of people who have already been selected and given an enormous gift. Not just the gospel in general, but real responsibilities. And what happened to these apostles? Well, Judas buried them. He got nothing. But the other guys, some of them wrote books, some of them went all over the world. You have different jobs that God assigned, and that came, as they used those, they got more. It reminds me of John 15, where the branch that grows the fruit gets pruned to bear more fruit. And so I think that the immediate context gives us an application that then can expand to us. Because like the apostles, every member of the church is a member of the body of Christ. And so we take the Lord's Supper, we see body of Christ, we see one another as members of that body. Every one of us is able to extend his kingdom into a different part of the world. And if all of us are doing what we can, my experience has been, like John 15 and like this, that God ends up sticking us with a job bigger than we thought we were interested in. And that's the way he does business. Timothy started out doing little things, he ended up going all over the world. Stephen started out just serving a few widows, ended up getting killed for Christ. That's kind of the way it works.
It's really good comments. Oh, I was wondering if you were going to say something.
I was thinking about what Ed just said about the audience being the apostles, and Jesus was about to leave, and it says that the man in the story is going on a journey, and he's leaving his whole property to his servants. So if you think about the property as the kingdom, that Jesus is entrusting this kingdom that he started, but he's not going to be the one sowing and scattering. He's leaving it to all these others who are going to be sowing and scattering on his behalf, and that then he will be the one doing the reaping and the gathering at some point. And so, you said it a few minutes ago. I think the whole point of this story is that it's about growth. Growth is expected, and it's not for just safeguarding. It's the whole purpose is to grow the kingdom.
I really think it comes down to love also, the motivating factor. If you truly love someone, you're going to put forth a great effort. If your children were to come with a sum of money and bring that money to you and say, Dad, could you invest this money for us? How much effort would you put into making sure that was done right, and that they would receive back what they were hoping? You would give it your all to your grandchildren, your children. And I think we need to look at that when God asks us to sow His word or to be that bright, shining light. The love that we have for the Father is what's going to drive us to go above and beyond with our efforts in that area.
I've always wanted to be able to do that in class. JB. Yeah.
I'll try to focus. It really seems like Jesus is wanting us to focus on a person's view of the master. Just the way it's worded, I knew you are a hard master, that, really grabs my attention. And then later, when the master says, he never says, yes, you're right, I am a hard master. He says, I reap where I didn't sow. I gather where I didn't spread or whatever. And this servant is entrusted with something. The master obviously, it's something big to trust someone with something, and yet this servant is afraid of it. And when the master trusts you and entrusts you with something, it should not paralyze us. Instead, we should feel empowered by it. And I don't think that a lot of times we feel empowered, and we don't feel like we have a gift that we want to invest.
Yeah.
And that's a shame. And I think Jesus is trying to tell us that is a shame. We should not feel paralyzed or scared by the Lord's or the Master's power.
Yeah. Let me just say, to me, reading this in California in the 20th century, I'm like, or whatever, like 2023, I'm like, oh, that third servant, he just is this timid, meek, lowly person. He just didn't want to mess it up, right? But it's so much more than that, and we're going to go there in just a second.
Yeah, he lacked faith. He lacked faith that he would be able to make it grow. And that's what the master says to the other two servants. He says, you have been faithful. And so it's the fear, it's the faith over fear, kind of concept that we can't, to Janet's point, we can't let fear rule over us. We have to have faith.
So I think we've all got this concept, but I want to touch on it briefly, because I think it's important for younger Christians that and maybe people that haven't heard this story and thought about it as much as many of us have. So, reading through it the first time at a younger age and not having given this a lot of thought, I'm like, man, this third servant is shy. He just didn't want to mess up. And being American, I'm like rooting for that underdog. I'm like, yes, and then like that was a really it seemed like a quick judgment on the master's part. I'm like, this does not fit. And so then I've got to back up and think, well, who's talking, right? It's Jesus. And what does Jesus think of people in authority? What does he think of the master? Is the master always right? No, the master's not always right. And so there's some nuances, because Jesus does call out bad leaders, and we know he feels a certain way about servants too, right? You know, he was described as meek and lowly, and he cared for the people that were the servants. But in this parable, Jesus calls out the servant that didn't do it. And I think we're doing a good job of finding these things that are really nuanced things in this story, right? Like there wasn't a lot of faith. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to connect the dots. In Matthew, this is part of 3 episodes. You have the parable of the virgins, you have the parable of the talents, and then you have the judgment scene. And as I mentioned, it starts in 24, and he says in 24:25, who's the wise and faithful servant? Well, we have the wise in the virgin, so we have the faithful in this one. But that kind of raises another question. Every one of these leaves what's called a narrative hole. There's something in it that makes you ask another question. With the virgin, you're going, okay, what's the oil? And so now it's using the stuff that you've been given. So then the next question is, okay, what does it mean to use the stuff you've been given in the judgment scene? And especially in the context of persecution, where they're fixing to go through a huge persecution. When we're going through persecution, what is it that can give us the oil? What is it that is investing? It's looking at that brother as Christ. Seeing Christ in that brother while we're going through affliction, in the midst of our affliction, serving that other person, somehow that's the investing, somehow that's the oil that'll get us through the persecution. And if that's what's going on here, then the connection is not just to using, my talents. That's all true and good. But it's also when we're faced with affliction and persecution, that's going to be showing how much we have invested ourselves in serving our brothers and sisters. And as we've been serving our brothers and sisters because we saw Christ in them, that puts us in a position where we've been investing what's been given to us so that we have the oil so that even when they kill us, we're in a different place than if we never developed that self-sacrificing reality in our world. So even though it's a very individual sense of responsibility, the punchline makes it so that in order for me individually to have that ability, I've got to be serving the brothers now, the brothers and sisters now. I think that whole picture is kind of important to remember.
Yeah. No. Oh, Carolyn, did I miss anything?
Maybe it's too early for how does this apply to us, but that's where my brain is about these talents. And I think that when we look at our lives, we have to say, what are we bearing? Like, what have we bearing that God has given to us? And typically, like Aaron's point, out of fear. Fear of judgment, fear of standing out, fear of... What is the fear that's holding you back from using the talents that God has given you? And I think that's an individual question each of us should ask.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're going to get there, and this is going by a little faster than I actually thought. So, which is good because I was not nervous about this at all. So the third servant, he says, "Master, I know you're a hard man." And what do you guys think about the reasons that he gives? You harvest where you haven't sown, and you gather where you scattered no seed. What are those reasons?
The bottom line is that the servant is his job to do it. And how can he's hired to do it. If it's in the servant's mind that we think the master's hard and actually doing it, it's not a fact.
Yeah, I mean, the master really called him out, right? He says, look, your actions speak louder than your thoughts. If you were really scared, you wouldn't have just dug a hole, you would have put it in the bank. And I think there's something deeper going on here. There's evil in your heart. You're assuming the worst. You attribute evil to others, and you're assuming the worst of others. And it's clear what you value based on your actions, right?
I think, when you look at what he's accused of, or not what he's accused of, but what he admits, the moment he says, I was afraid, and think about fear. I know we've compared fear, to faithlessness. But when I'm afraid, take it out of the context of anything religious. I'm afraid of skydiving. Why am I afraid of skydiving? Am I afraid of not having fun on the way down? No, it sounds exciting. If you could promise me I won't hit the bottom, I wouldn't be afraid of skydiving. But I'm afraid of losing. I'm afraid of losing something that I value. This person is afraid. And he's afraid, which means the reality is he's selfish. He's afraid for himself. I'm afraid I'm going to either lose what you've given me, and you're going to be hard on me, or I'm not going to be successful, or I'm going to go out and do something stupid, or whatever. I might be afraid of, being social with my brethren. Well, I'm afraid of being social. Why? Because I'm afraid that I'm going to do something stupid. I'm going to be made to feel foolish. There's something I'm not willing to risk what I have, what I think is mine. And that's what he's doing. And so the master, essentially, he's being judged for thinking of himself. He's in his own interests instead of thinking of the master. And so these disciples, these apostles, are going to be sent out and say, you have to think of God's interests before your own. You have to not be afraid to lose your life, lose your friends, lose your job. And we have to be the same way. Not be afraid to lose what I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope I'm not going to get messing up, but the master says, you wicked and lazy servant. If you translate that over to talents, or just doing your job, which the servant would do, it is not just okay from more revenge. Every Sunday, you attend every single service. And I don't think attending church is a talent. I think it's something we do to grow. But it's wicked and lazy to not use what God has given us. Now, that doesn't mean everybody needs to nail to a cross. It doesn't mean everybody needs to start a huge congregation. It means whatever God's giving you, whatever talent He's giving you. It says in the Word says, before the world was created, there were things planned for us individually to do. God expects us to do our job. Our job is to serve Him, love Him, and work the talents and use the talents that He's given us. And it is wicked and lazy not to do it. I'm a little trembly here because I know I haven't done enough. But it's not a matter of working with others. It's a matter of honoring God. It's a matter of loving God and loving your fellow beings by spreading the word to others. And it's about being kind to someone. If your talent is encouragement, it's to encourage someone. It doesn't cost you. It's the way you choose to live life. You're either for it or against it.
I think Janet, no.
What is interesting to me is where the last guy said, what his master was that he reaped where he did not sow. And, in our lives, our purpose is to go out and reach others for Christ. And in that, we don't always, we may reap what someone else had sowed previously to another person, and so Jesus came on this earth to, enhance His kingdom and to save people, and here this guy doesn't want to do any of this.
like you, when I was younger, I always felt sorry for the third servant, like he didn't know what to do, and so, he did what he knew to do, I guess, is the way I saw it. But like, the more I see this, the more it's obvious. It should be obvious if you think about it, if you really put yourself in the place of these servants, that the master wanted them to do something with what he's given them. Because, like, duh. I mean, the master could have buried it in the earth if that's all he wanted was to safeguard it. And so it's almost like you're insulting the master. Like, do you think I'm dumb? I could have done that. So I don't know. I think, again, it's like a view of how do we view God. And one other thing that I keep thinking about is when we talk about this gift, we all have one gift that, yes, we have other gifts that are different one from another, but we all have this one gift that we should not hide away, and it's salvation. And if we do not love people the way we ought to, and the way that we are expected to deal with that gift of salvation is to tell other people so that we all can glorify God, not just so that we can check off a list, but glorify God by telling people about our salvation and the good news. That's why it's called good news, because it's good and we should not hide it away. Sorry.
Let me say something real quick. There's not a lot of other places that Jesus talks about hiding stuff, right? In the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, verse 14, he says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house." So then you think about this servant hiding that gift that he was given. It brings it into a little more context, and it's hard because our culture is different than this culture in first century Jerusalem, Roman Empire, where honor and shame were way more important than they seem now. Aaron. Yeah.
When Jana was talking, it made me think that it also brings to light this individual responsibility. This master's kingdom was worth 8 talents at the beginning. And at the end of this, he comes back with 7 times more. So it did grow by a lot. It very successful by all accounts. But the third guy doesn't get to ride the coattails of the other 2 that were working, and it's not a passive thing. If you are in it, you have to participate. It's not just, you can't just be, with the waves of the ocean, right? You have to actively be part of it.
Did you guys notice that the first 2 servants, they worked hard in a very similar manner to how the master worked. Did you guys notice that? I've spent probably much less time than many people, but it just dawned on me the other day, the master sees the servants doing what he's doing, and really that's what we're supposed to do, right? Radiate the glory of God and be representatives of God on this earth. Oh, Jim, I'm sorry. Have you had your hand up before and I just didn't see it? I want to hear you finish. Well, I think people get trapped by their own hang-ups, right? And that's that third servant. They get trapped by their own hang-ups, and in this scenario, he ends up attributing evil to the master because of what's inside him instead of just trying. So,
one of the things that I'm thinking throughout this is, and Ed keeps talking about context, starting in chapter 21, he is denouncing the old servants that he put in charge of his vineyard. And he goes on in 23, and he really just shows how depraved they've become. They're going to show the world on Friday, how depraved they've become. And so he is not talking about people who are his servants, but he's actually talking to his disciples, who he is going to hand the keys of the kingdom over to. You cannot become like this. And I think one of the greatest fears, we're talking about paralyzing fears, a parable like this we can begin to think that we have some sort of quid pro quo with God. Our salvation is determined by our performance. And the greatest gift, and our sister mentioned this, is imputed righteousness. He has actually clothed us with righteousness. And what he expects of us is to actually live that out. But we don't have a performance-based Christianity. But if we do nothing like those Jewish leaders, we can do nothing. The very next parable says, we do nothing for him. We just somehow find in Christianity just a way to express ourselves, we will be condemned. But there's no trade between our work and our salvation implied here in any way.
It's all about developing ourselves and God helping us develop ourselves. So, Scott, you get the last word.
I just want to let everybody know we're going to wrap this up Wednesday night. I'm going to finish Matthew 25.
I knew I did not